Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on global development, looking at modernization theory and gender. Modernization theorists often blame the culture of nations in the developing world for the failure of developmental policy. They see traditional values of collectivism and religious affiliation as being problematic, and according to Parsons, nations need to develop Western ideas of individualism and entrepreneurship in order to move through the different stages of modernization. One such feature of developing nations that comes in for criticism is the role of women in the developing world, and how patriarchal societies that control women lead to higher rates of fertility and less independence for women. That means that valuable resources are spent on looking after larger families. This stunts development, as resources are allocated towards issues such as poverty rather than being placed into investment and technology. One target of modernization criticisms is traditional religious values. For example, both Catholicism and Islam, two of the more dominant religions in the developing world, advocate not using contraception, which leads to more births and subsequently larger populations. For modernization theorists, the answer to this is to replace traditional ideas of religion with scientific and rational thinking in order to move through the stages of modernization. And key to this, particularly in later developmental policies, is the education and employment of women and girls. In this video, we're going to outline how modernization theorists view gender in the developing world, as well as looking at some criticisms of their approach. As previously discussed, modernization theory sees traditional values of religion and the collective family unit as being a brake on development, and in particular how these agencies of socialization adopt a patriarchal view of women. Males have dominance over women and their activities in many parts of the world, and women's lower status means that their potential contribution to the economy is not being fully realized. Furthermore, the focus on women as being mothers leads modernization theorists to suggest that higher fertility rates in the developing world lead to overpopulation, and that this draws valuable resources away from investing in technology and industry. Reducing the population so that they are smaller, more geographically and socially mobile nuclear families, as outlined by Parsons' earlier functional fit theory, would aid development and is in stark contrast to the larger extended families that exist in traditional societies. Modernization theorists suggest that the developing world needs to undergo the same form of demographic transition as Western nations during the Industrial Revolution and early industrial society, in order to become modern societies, and the role of women is key to that. To address these issues, Boserup argues that there needs to be greater educational opportunities for girls in the developing world in order to break the cycle of childbearing, and this has been part of official development policy since the latter part of the 20th century. The main argument is that getting women into formal employment, particularly for TNCs, will encourage greater economic independence from males and also reduce the fertility window, meaning women will have less children. This is done in part through social engineering. Many modernization theorists have called for the promotion of Western values through the media, including promoting gender equality and women's liberation in order to achieve this aim. Furthermore, males have been targeted to help facilitate this by changing attitudes to women in order to reduce conflict. The extent to which this has been successful, however, is debatable and has led to accusations of cultural imperialism, the imposition of Western ideas and values as being superior to those from other cultures, and has led to conflict and anti-Western sentiments. For many critical theorists, these views are highly controversial. Suggesting that Western women are role models has caused conflict in more traditional societies, not only for assuming that Western values are superior, but also for the criticism of other cultures. Gender identity is often linked to traditional patterns of socialization and cultural attitudes, and critics suggest that dismissing the culture and history of a nation and imposing norms and values upon it is a form of cultural imperialism. Furthermore, some feminists have argued that criticism of women for wearing religious forms of clothing, such as the burqa or the niqab, ignores the fact that many women choose to wear these forms of clothing to have control over how society perceives them. Quite simply, it is their choice to wear these garments, rather than the Western view of them being a symbol of patriarchal control. Other critics of modernization theory, such as Marxist feminists, suggest that the promotion of women's education and employment by modernization theorists is a form of exploitation rather than empowerment. By transmitting messages encouraging girls to go into employment, especially for TNCs, they are creating a cheap army of labour. Export processing zones are largely reliant upon women's labour, and in return they receive low wages and work in poor conditions, mass-producing goods for Western markets. By creating a reserve army of labour, as in the West, this can drive down wages. Furthermore, critics have suggested that there are ideological factors with aid given to women, especially in terms of health. The role of non-governmental organisations in promoting family planning and contraception causes friction between an individual's freedom of religious practice and a need for global population control. This battle over reproductive rights between science and religion becomes a choice between having a choice over when and if a woman decides to have children, versus the Western idea of how many children a woman should have, substituting one form of control for another. That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on global development, looking at modernisation theory and gender. Thanks for watching.